Hello and welcome to the Underhive. Thank you for joining me for something a little bit different. Now, as it goes, I mentioned this in the little sort of short update in the previous video. But yeah, I've tried recording this like a couple of times and a few other bits, and I just haven't really been happy with the video and my quality analytics. So I'm redoing this one. Hopefully I'm happy with it this time, but you'll never see it if it isn't. So let's crack on and see what we're going to be saying. So I've seen this article. It's kind of 2 days old now, so I'm a little bit late to the party. I have seen plenty of other videos on this subject on YouTube, but not all of them address these points. So firstly, I wanted to read this article by Sisi Jiang, and then I'll chuck in my opinion here at the end. The title here of the article: "Please free me from bad takes about China's gaming restrictions. There's no one-size-fits-all take when you're dealing with millions of diverse gamers." And that's probably true of anything when you're dealing with any large population. So we're going to read through the full thing, and then I'll add my bits at the end. So whenever any kind of news about China hits the internet, I brace myself for oversimplifications by English language writers and commentators. So presumably they are of Chinese descent. I'm not 100% sure. But in a country with roughly 720 million gamers, roughly twice the size of the US population, the content behind the recent gaming restrictions placed on the Chinese youth isn't as straightforward as narratives about sinister, big government politics might make it seem. Starting from September 1st, players under 18 years of age are restricted to 1 hour of gaming a day on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and public holidays, so presumably no other access besides that. The restrictions imposed on players don't come from the law, so it's not a legal requirement for anybody to follow this regulation. It's an industry regulation recently passed by the National Press and Publication Administration, NPAA. Now, I have read this bit before, and I will say this is the most ridiculous thing about this article, because this is not a parallel example at all. Imagine you're an American company, and this is also pretty heavy juxtaposition as well. Imagine you're an American company that wants to dump radioactive waste into a lake, and the Environmental Protection Agency said that you can't do that. Regulations are specific rather than broadly applied to the populace. The NPAA is a government regulatory branch that oversees print, online, and broadcast media more broadly and has the sole purview over digital games. So like a more parallel example would be rules on alcohol consumption or rules on gambling. They're regulatory backed. It's illegal to go against those regulations as a company, but it's not like the law says you can't gamble if you're under 18. It says you can't profit from somebody under 18 gambling, as far as I'm aware. So yeah, I don't like this bit, but the rest of it I'll just read through. Under the regulations, gaming companies are tasked with preventing minors from accessing their games during certain times and to boot players after they run out of their allotted time. Jingtong Zhu, a publishing manager at a Chinese gaming company, told Kotaku that Chinese games have previously been restricted to an hour and a half on weekdays, 3 hours on weekends, and holidays. So the latest mandate is an extreme tightening of government regulations that have already existed since 2019. Why do these rules exist? While it might be tempting to generalise the Chinese government as inherently regulatory, it's important to consider that the gaming landscape in China is very different to North America and Europe. Daniel Ahmad of Nico Partners told Kotaku that around 92 to 95% of games made in China are based on a free-to-play model. So while most Kotaku readers might think of first-party titles or self-contained indie games as what a video game is, most Chinese players will probably think of free multiplayer online battle arena, MOBAs, like Honor of Kings, or gacha games like Genshin Impact. This means that gaming addiction and delinquent spending, two qualities associated with these type of games, are much more prevalent concern in China compared to the West. But regulators are also part of why Chinese gaming turned out very differently compared to gaming in other countries. For example, Zhu mentioned that China's 15-year-old console ban was also motivated by concerns about video game addiction, a ban that arguably led to the popularity of free-to-play games, and presumably mobile games. China's lucrative $360 million esports industry poses another complication to a clear-cut anti-gaming narrative. According to Zhu, regional governments like the city of Shanghai are very supportive of both esports and game development industries. For a company like MiHoYo, ranked 88th among all Shanghainese companies in terms of income, its tax contribution is an important part of the local economy. At a national level, the Ministry of Education started categorizing esports management as an official major in 2016. It's pretty ridiculous to make a broad statement about how the Chinese government, what level, which branch, any specific individuals, is necessarily anti-gaming. And I'll come back to it, but yeah, I mean, to make any broad statement like that is pretty strange. Like, you couldn't possibly know everything. Shanghai has been welcoming to foreign offices such as Ubisoft and Activision, so it's weird to see a lot of takes that portray China as an anti-gaming country. This is the biggest esports market in the world, in a country with the most gamers. It's not a single Chinese interest. There's not a single Chinese interest when it comes to gaming. The company's president isn't the one calling all the shots. I think what they mean there is like there's not a singular Chinese interest when it comes to gaming. There are multiple interests, and some people are for, some people against. I don't think what they're saying is there is no interest in gaming, because obviously there is profit. The company's president isn't the one calling all the shots. Yeah, but the party that president represents are. So, you know, most presidents aren't in charge of everything. They're the front man, and their party make a lot of decisions, and they get some sort of say on the result. Consider also that it's not all Chinese minors that are affected equally. As one might imagine, players' experiences are heavily influenced by factors such as gender and class. The New York Times states that parents are largely the driving force behind the new gaming restrictions, but it leaves off some important data that from the report that it cites. According to the report from Beijing Youth Legal Aid and Research Center, over 90% of the minors with gaming addictions are boys, and roughly 70% come from blue-collar families. If nearly two-thirds of parents reporting gaming addiction issues are laborers, I'm not sure, like, laborers is necessarily a synonym for blue-collar, but okay. Then it refrains from the narrative of restrictions as an initiative that is mostly relevant to working families. The report noted that children often receive mobile games when their parents can't afford professional childcare. Even after gaming restrictions went into effect, I don't think they resolved the factors that caused aggrieved parents to demand stricter regulations to begin with. While I don't claim that free-to-play games are blameless, the problems that the restrictions are trying to address are partially caused by external socio-economic factors. China already has a grey market for PC and console games, Zhu explained to Kotaku, that since Steam is an overseas operation, it isn't held to the same regulatory standards. In fact, Steam has around 30 million Chinese users in 2018. VPNs are another popular way to gain access to video games, but the MPPA's new regulations mostly target mobile games by design. As Zhu noted, most minors are primarily mobile gamers and aren't heavily Steam users. However, even mobile games aren't completely out of luck. There's a tweet here from Josh Yi. But the game, and I mean, this is 8 and 9, so I'm not gonna read that. But this is section 8 and 9 of his presumably quite long tweet, so I don't know what the rest says, but okay. The games that have to connect to overseas servers can be notoriously slow. So companies develop game boosters to give players fast and reliable connections to their favorite titles by offering access to gaming-only servers. Game boosters exist in a legal grey area. China has more gamers than all video game players in the US, Japan, Germany, France, and the UK combined. Many of these gamers enjoy playing overseas, leading to more frequent in-game conflict between Chinese and foreign players. I mean, I don't think that's limited to gaming, I will say. We'll come back, but I don't think that's isolated to gaming. Complying with the new rule isn't technically difficult because it's just a matter of writing new software development kit codes. SDKs are an integral part of the login process. What happens is that when new players log in, they're asked to enter their ID number, which then verifies their age. The gamer needs to log in with their real name, and every domestic game that legally operates in China is required to have that function. So again, the regulation is on the provider of the game to have this system, not on anybody specifically to follow it. It's not a law, from what I understand. According to Nico's partners, Ahmad, parents aren't barred from giving their unrestricted adult accounts to their children, and there's a large grey market for adult gaming accounts. If an underage player wanted to, they could circumvent new restrictions. but not every gamer is necessarily tech savvy, and as such, and such a far-reaching regulation may have unforeseen consequences. So where does that leave us? My sources agree that the severity of the restrictions are unique, even if the methods of enforcing them aren't. Personally, I've admired how Japan has implemented consumer regulations on gacha spending, but NPPA's new regulations seem too far-reaching. While the economic disruption on the industry is projected to be survivable, the effect on millions of players' lifestyles are much more difficult to predict. Chinese players aren't a monolith. They each have their own personal relationship to gaming. Industry does not solely define gaming, the players do too. So, just to critique the article a little bit, so it's free me from these bad takes. So I think what they're saying a bad take is an oversimplification about a big sinister government. I don't think they disagree with the take that this is quite strict, it's quite excessive as far as regulations go. But I think their point is just that this isn't necessarily the right way to go about it, but to just say that, it's overly regulatory because, China as a country isn't the right way to look at it. And I think that's fair enough. They get an hour a day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So they get those 3 hours a day, so 3 hours a week, plus a bit extra for public holidays. But there's nothing to stop you as a parent giving your phone to your kid and letting them play. So for me, if the problem is gaming addiction and delinquent spending, the two are intrinsically linked there when you consider that free-to-play games are heavily monetized in the West. I can only imagine they're the same sort of area in the East as well, particularly in China. So the addiction, the spending feeds into the addiction's causing the spending. So they're not two separate issues in my mind. They're the same thing. And again, I suppose it just comes down to a lack of productivity. You're wasting time and money on this, and it's not good for you when you could be putting time and money into something that is. So if it is, and I've got no way to prove either way, if it is parents that have prompted this, then they're misguided because they didn't grow up with these games and they don't fully understand them. I don't really think it's the government's place to step in and introduce a regulation when the issue is that parents aren't able to keep up with the rate of technology that their kids are, because their kids have spent essentially their whole life with it, where the parents, it's been new to them for the last 10, 15 years or what have you. So they're not necessarily caught up. So realistically, regulating the amount of after school activities or community activities that kids can get involved with that aren't playing video games on a mobile would have more an effect than this, in my opinion. And there's the implication that this will cost their gaming economy. The argument would be, children under 18, or I don't know what the legal age to make your own financial decisions in China is, but if you're under 18, as far as my understanding is, you're not an adult in most parts of the world. So you shouldn't really be making your own financial decisions. And if the argument is that they're going to lose money because they're saying to the kids they can't play as much, then they're manipulating children into spending money. And that's the bit that should be regulated. Whereas just limiting the amount of time they can play isn't necessarily going to stop kids spending money, if that's your point. Particularly if it's not their money, it's the parents' money. They've got no concept of how much they're actually spending. I just don't think that solves the issue. But the thing for me that really is the shocking bit is that you have to enter your ID number, which I imagine is a state ID number, like a social security or something like that, or national insurance. So they identify you at a citizen level before you can play this game. And I think that's where the sinister aspect comes in, because firstly, all of these companies have a branch of their company that is the government. So even if the information isn't relayed directly back to the government and they've just got to prove that they, don't operate outside these regulations, you're at the bare minimum giving all these companies children's details, habits of spending, habits of leisure use for gaming before they're old enough to actually give consent like formally in a contract. And presumably this all goes back to the government. And whilst I don't think that it's fair to like, tar this particular regulation with the same brush as any other regulation that there might be in China, I do think that that's the bit that makes people jump off that cliff into the, it's just overly regulated, but it's a bad idea. But if you look at the amount of time like a kid should be spending playing video games, bear in mind the parents can reward them with it if they go, well, you've been good at school, done all the stuff, being respectful to us, no problems with what you're doing at all. It's all great. Would you like to play a video game for a few hours because I think you've earned it? Brilliant. But if that's what the parents are doing, then they wouldn't have been rallying for this regulation, because you as a parent have the most autonomy to regulate your child. You control pretty much every aspect of their life and routine. So making the government step in, and I'm not a parent, but I'm pretty sure almost every parent knows that. If you're not a particularly good parent, maybe you haven't considered it, but you probably know on some level that you're in charge of what they do. And if you accept defeat that you're no longer in control of that child, then the issue happened like 10 years ago. You veered off the right path a long time before that. But if you're in a position where you are actually regulating it yourself, I don't think you'd be rallying for the state to do it, especially when it comes to them taking the details of your kid every time they log into any game they're playing. So for me, I don't know. I mean, I've got no evidence either way, but it just seems a bit far-fetched that it's solely the parents that have asked for this, especially if they did fully understand what that entailed. Now, most parents aren't programmers. I'm not a programmer, but they mention here about these software development kit codes. Like, all this metadata and back-end data about what your kid's doing isn't something that I feel most parents would just willingly give up if they fully understood it. So either they've rallied for regulation without fully understanding how far-reaching it is, or they haven't, and it's been pushed on that ground when that isn't really the case. But for me, to be honest, I don't think limiting how much kids play video games is a bad thing. I think it should be done by the parent, and I think it should be used as a reward for doing other things. But given that this isn't a legal requirement to follow, I don't think it's that big a deal, other than the fact that you have to give your social security number to play a video game. If I was there and that was my kid in that position, I'd be like, look, you don't play video games on your own account, you play them on mine. That's it. I'll let you have an hour or whatever I think is appropriate when I think it's appropriate, but I don't want you entering your details in like that until you're 18, and then you can decide when it's appropriate. So that's the bit of concern to me. Let me know what you think in the comments. Half the time of the previous episode, so I think I've done a better job with it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time in the Underhive.